began in Washington State. That is, that's where I was living. That's where I grew up as a kid. And that's where I grew up as a young man. And those kinds of images, impulses, and behaviors which ultimately led to the violent behavior, occurred, if you will, in Washington State.
Okay, so my name is Sherri Wilson. This is Outline of a Murder, the Smart True Crime Podcast.
I'm Elena. And I'm Mom.
All right, so when we decided to do this podcast, which we told a little bit of the story at the very first episode, I had one condition. I had to have Ted Bundy in our first series, or our first season. And everybody was in agreement. And because... to me, he is the most fascinating serial killer out there. And until Israel Keys. And I think it's because of how normal he seemed. Mm-hmm. I think that's what makes him scary. I think that's what makes him fascinating.
And looked.
And he was good looking. Yes. I mean, when you think of a killer, you think of a monster. And he was not. And... So, when I watched this series, which a lot of what we're talking about today will be from, as well as the book. So the series name was Ted Bundy Falling for a Killer. And the book is The Phantom Prince. And it's from his long-term girlfriend, Elizabeth. It's her perspective of what it was like dating this man, which some believe he started killing while they were dating. I personally believe he had killed before. But Mark Pinsky was a journalist that had interviewed Bundy when he was, I think it was when he was maybe in Utah or Colorado. I can't remember. But he said that when he met him, he was sitting at a table or a desk in his jail cell listening to classical music. He was charming and soft-spoken, and suddenly this terrifying thought came to Mark. He said, the more we talked, the more normal he seemed to be. And he felt that if Bundy was capable of doing what he did, he had to face the notion that maybe he was too.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Because of how normal he seems.
Because usually there's something you can...
Yeah. I mean, I can't imagine, like, if you know the background of this killer, which everybody knows, everybody knows who Ted Bundy is. If you know how he killed, I mean, it was awful, the things he did to these ladies. And then you see him and he seems that normal, I think it would be freaky. I think it'd be like, well, if he could do it, wouldn't anybody be able to do what he did? So, which is obviously not true, but I could see how this journalist...
cross his mind.
Yeah.
I don't see that.
Oh, I can't.
You don't?
Think that. No.
He's completely normal.
I wouldn't compare myself or think I had the capacity to do that. It wouldn't even cross my mind.
And I think maybe part of what occurred is there might have been a strong rapport that was built right off the bat. We've talked about that, where mirroring common interests. And what I'm thinking may have happened to Mark, because we're kind of just diving right in to prove how normal he seemed to people before we get to the actual story. And that is that probably Mark listened to classical music, seeing him at a desk working on his case,
And Ted Bundy was a manipulator. He could make you feel any way he wanted you.
Right. So I just thought that was interesting, how scared that made him think. And like I've alluded to the entire time we've been recording is the only other killer that's gotten my attention, like Ted Bundy, is Israel Keys. He's very intriguing. We're going to finish the season off with him. Same thing. He seemed very, very normal. And so I think the notion that killers look like monsters needs to be gotten rid of.
Yeah.
Of course you have those that didn't have social skills, like the cannibal up in...
Jeffrey Dahmer.
Yeah, Jeffrey Dahmer. But then you have, the Green River Killer that was free for decades. BTK, He was a deacon in his Baptist church.
Right.
I remember in Clovis, a guy that killed a worker that she worked at a barbecue place, and he posed the body. Later, come to find out, he was addicted to snuff films and pornography. Grew up with one of my best friends there, and he was a dentist. No one would have ever known. And I think the way he posed the body and the victim he picked, that was similar to the ladies he liked in the porn shows, I think he was a budding serial killer. I think he would have done it again. And it was even on Paula Zahn's On the Case.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So normal does not mean people are normal.
No. Could be. But
So-
not all dentists,
Are serial killers.
Yeah.
Yes. And we've talked about how to be safe, and how to watch red flags. So here with Elizabeth, again, I think she's an S personality. And she was addicted. She was addicted to Ted Bundy. And it was he got a hook in her. And we're going to break that down.
Was that her first boyfriend or someone she met later?
Probably since she was married, because she had a high school sweetheart, and then they ended up divorcing. And I think after being married, and she grew up in a sheltered life, which we're going to get into, but he just knew all the right things to say. But I think that he would have killed her that night, but for some reason he didn't.
Right.
And we can't ask him, because
Right.
he's been fried. So how can a person be safe from predators like this? Why do some get hooked and almost addicted and unable to leave? And what in them makes them susceptible? That's what I want to break down in these next episodes.
I'm not sure you can be safe.
I think to a degree you can, like with Deborah, with Dirty John, trusting the red flags.
Right.
And then just being aware and knowing that you may be one of those sweethearts that believes everybody, so stop.
Right.
Stop doing that. Okay, so our focus is actually going to be on Elizabeth Kendall, a long-term girlfriend of Bundy during the years that he was actively killing. We will discuss his crimes more in depth in the after show combo. But of all we've studied this season, Elizabeth and then Deborah from Dirty John are the most intriguing because of how hard it was for them to get away from these men. And even though they knew or they suspected them of crimes. They're also both examples that your background, financial status, intelligence, or anything else that you think might make you immune won't. Deborah was a successful, wealthy businesswoman. Elizabeth was a single mom. So it's almost like psychopaths have an inherent ability to find those areas that will hook you and keep feeding you their drug. So I don't want to start with Bundy's killings. I want to start with Elizabeth and give you some background. So Elizabeth was raised in a typical home. Her dad was a respected doctor in Ogden, Utah. I've been there. And then her mother was a nurse until their first child came, and then she was a stay-at-home mom. So Ogden is about 30 miles from Salt Lake City, where the Mormon temple is. I've been there. Have y'all been to Salt Lake City?
No.
It's gorgeous, and it's one of the cleanest cities I've ever seen in my life. It's this huge city that is spotless. I do remember when I was there once, because I went up there by myself for a Young Living convention. I remember walking down to Jason's Deli to get a salad, and the lady said, "Hey, it's starting to get dark, so you probably want to make sure you get back to your hotel before then." And I'm like, "Okay, why?" And she said, "Because all the homeless come out at that time." And I was like, "Well, that doesn't mean they're criminals, but the criminal element is there, and they will harass you if not, criminal activity does increase in a certain part of town."
Wow.
So I was like, okay.
Yeah.
So now Mormonism is a big deal in Utah, but not really for them. So they were of the Mormon faith, but it wasn't like they were, kind of like some Catholics that they're Catholic, but they don't go to church all the time and stuff. That's kind of how they were.
They're not practicing.
Very good. Yeah, practicing. So they were active in the church, but, not that big of a deal. And she wrote in her book, Phantom Prince, they were considered Jack Mormons, people who were Mormon in name only. But that was funny. And she did say that her and her mom prayed together when she was little, and she knew the power of prayer. But she also said that she knew that if you don't forget to be grateful, God will get you.
Is she the only child?
No. But that irritates me because God is not out to get people.
No.
And but religion will put that in people's heads. It's like, if you don't do what he wants, he'll punish you. And of course, I don't have time to get into all of that, but it just gives you a background of her mentality of performance. You know, that
Right.
if she did these things right, then good things would happen to her. If she didn't, then bad things would happen. And the reason I bring that up is it creates this blame and this lack of value for yourself as a person.
I've met a lot of people, though, believe that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that probably was a conditioning that didn't help her. And then in high school, she had a steady boyfriend named Ben. And he had a black MGA sports car that they rode in and washed and waxed it all of the time. And they also went skiing a lot. And they both wanted to get married as soon as they had graduated and start having babies. So she wanted to be a mom right off the bat. And they even had a name picked out. If it was a boy, it would be Stein, the name of a popular ski racer at the time. But her parents wanted her to get her college education first. And she didn't care about that at all. She just wanted to be a wife, be a mom, and start having babies. But her parents won, she said, and she went off to college and went through sorority rush, but was dropped by the end of the week because she's too shy. So,
Too shy.
Yeah. So just to set up her personality and just watching her on the show and reading her book, she was probably an introvert. And so I think that she was an SC personality, which means that she was going to, be people focused. She's going to love people, be nurturing and accepting. But the C part of her would be more analogical and analytical and logical. Analogical, I like that. Mm-hmm. We might as well just make that a word. But those two
Right.
personality combinations do tend to be introverted. But people make a mistake on thinking that introverts are shy. Some are. But an introvert simply needs time alone. So like for me, I am an introvert, and then I have to get away from people. I get energized by alone time, but my D part of my personality, I can be very assertive and confident, and no one has any idea how nervous I am. For the SC personality, she might have been what's called an anxious introvert, where social situations made her very nervous. And that will be important because she really struggled with her shyness unless she drank.
Oh, yeah.
So, or if she was around people she knew, like Ben and her friends, she could be very talkative and fun, but make others laugh. But with strangers, she would shut down and have a rough time. And she couldn't think of anything to say, right? Like my specialty is training introverts on how to be confident. That's what my course is about. So, and she said that afterwards, she was afraid she'd say something stupid, and then she would relive and rethink the conversations she had and how she came off for months.
So she obviously had a self-esteem issue, a huge one.
Yeah. And one of our family friends is actually what I would term an anxious introvert. There's like 4 types. I'm a social introvert. I think Elizabeth was probably an anxious introvert. And she said that when she realized that there was nothing wrong with her, and that's just how she was designed, and that there were tools to help her in situations like Elizabeth found herself in, it helped her so much. And so I don't know, I have a soft place in my heart for introverts, because I think they really struggle, where you're actually an extrovert. You don't have any problem starting conversations and talking to people, right?
No, I don't.
And you love
Sometimes
being
I
around
wish.
people.
Yeah, I love being around people.
Mm-hmm.
The more
I
the
definitely
merrier.
have to disconnect and recharge.
And that's a true extrovert gets energy from social interaction and being with people.
That's me.
Wow.
I know. We're obviously
energy.
not that. So, but the one thing that did help her come out of her shell was alcohol. So she began to party a lot. Her grades went down. She was suspended at the end of her freshman year.
Oh, no.
And she broke up with Ben.
Oh.
I know, it's sad. And we don't really know why, because Bundy literally stole decades from her. And so it's really sad. Like, marry Ben, when I was reading the book. But she didn't. And so they were attracted to each other physically. They had made, a commitment to abstain until they got married. Well, in the spring of her first year of college, she lost her virginity, and she couldn't tell Ben, so she just broke up with him.
Oh, okay.
And so she eventually married a man, the man that she lost her virginity to, but the marriage ended. But she did end up having a young daughter named Molly, and this is her in the picture right here when she was really little.
Cute.
And so she felt like she needed a fresh start. You know, I mean, obviously she grew up in a religious upbringing, but not too bad. You know, they were Jack Mormons, but she's got this relationship with Ben. And she's basically probably in her mind soiled.
Yeah.
There's no way she can marry him. So she picked Seattle as a place to move to. Yeah. And it was a recommendation from some guys she really didn't know. And so she's like, sure, that sounds like a good idea. So you can already see how things are setting her up for Bundy. And she's drinking a lot. She was shy. She's already been married and, divorced. And she has a young child. And now she's a single mom.
That really hits on your self-esteem.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Just failure. That's how it would be interpreted. And it's not. It's poor choices, yes. But failure is so final, you know. And I remember it took me years to recognize failure as feedback. So if I am making poor choices that lead to things, occurring that I don't like, then I can sit down and say, okay, what's this telling me? And learn from that experience instead of, continuing to make the wrong decisions. But a lot of people don't know that. Now, she really loved Seattle. So she found her own place to live. She found a good job. Money was usually tight being a single mom, but it was a great job. And then here's where normal life can suddenly put you in the path of a psychopath. So Elizabeth had gotten a parking ticket, and she was very upset about it that day. So her friend Angie, was like her go-to person. And so she was at her house crying about her parking ticket. Well, she's a single mom, So I remember those days. And one of the roommates' boyfriends came in and said she needed a night out. And she's like, all right. So by nightfall, they had organized a party to celebrate her parking ticket. And it was at the Sandpiper Tavern that she saw a handsome, tall, sandy-haired man that asked her to dance. So I can just imagine, she's stressed because of a parking ticket. She's already drank some. Mm-hmm. Her life has been jacked up until now. And here this handsome man asks her to dance.
Yeah.
And, I mean, not to say she's not pretty, but when you compare her to some of his other girlfriends, she is more plain. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not saying this played a factor, but I'm thinking, okay, so I'm going back to when I was 11 years old and we had a dance to celebrate going into junior high. And I had a crush on two guys. One was named Stormy, one was named Gilbert Gonzalez. I still remember his name. And we had actually become really good friends in class. And he was like, they were both the popular kids. But for some reason, we were like fast friends. And his group of friends gave him such a rough time for being friends with me. Why are you friends with her? She's not one of us. Because I wasn't rich. I wasn't beautiful like these other people. But we were just buddies. Well, anyway, at the dance, I worked up the courage to ask Stormy to dance. And he said no. And I'm like, all right. So I go back over, and I'm like, man, I want to get out of here. I'm so excited. And Gilbert saw it and came up and asked me to dance. Aww. And he taught me how to slow dance. Yep. And that made my night. Never saw him again. But he made me feel valuable and special. I wonder if that's how she felt.
Yeah. That's good for an 11-year-old to do something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was very nice. So, I don't know. I don't know if that was the case, but I think that if I, was in that position and someone handsome walks up, I'd be like, oh,
show her interest.
Yeah. So at this point, she's already had a few beers or drinks, and her shyness is gone. Okay. Right. So for the rest of the evening, they both danced with other people, but there was definitely chemistry between them. He did not ask her to dance again, though. Now, later she noticed him sitting by himself at a table looking sad, so they started talking, and she was embarrassed to say that she was a secretary, so she lied. and said that she made heart valves in the instrument department at the university.
That's a leap.
Yeah.
Secretary.
Right.
Where did that come from?
I have no idea. And so by the end of the night, he knew why she had moved from Utah, that she had briefly been married, that she had a daughter, and how she felt out of place in Utah as a single mother.
Out of place.
How old was she at this point?
Well, she moved not long after her freshman year, so she's probably still, if even 20.
20?
So she's young.
Around there, yeah.
But I say that to point out, he basically knew her entire life history, and he's a complete stranger.
Yeah. Especially that, yeah.
And so at this point, they don't think he's killed. Again, I do. So it's kind of like, okay, and he actually admitted later to trying to kill her twice. So this is in, I think, 69 or 70. He first started killing supposedly in 74.
And how old was he when he met her?
I don't know for sure because he always lied about his age. And he always went to university even though he should have been graduated by then, but he was young.
He does look older than her.
Yeah, I think he was definitely older, but he always lied about his age. So she was impressed with his nice clothes and the way he carried himself. It was easy to talk to him, and he had a British accent. So you'll want to keep that in mind. And he said his name was Ted Bundy. She said, I was already planning the wedding and naming the kids.
Oh, my word.
Wow.
The very first interaction. That's a huge leap.
Yeah.
Be careful.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, I remember the powerful emotion of dancing with Gilbert when he asked me. You know what I mean? And so even though we never saw each other again, that's still a fond memory. So I can imagine with her background and what she's been through, and she's always wanted children, and the white picket fence with the 2.5 kids and the dog, in the front yard. I mean, she's like planning it out, meeting this strange man for the first time. So please don't give your entire life history to strangers in bars or anywhere else.
Especially your vulnerability.
Yes.
Right.
Isolation.
Yeah.
Personality.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting he chose her, though, out of all those people.
And she does have the long hair that he liked.
Yeah.
So Elizabeth invited Ted to go have coffee with her and her friends, but they couldn't find the cafe, and they decided to go home. At this point, Elizabeth is very drunk. So Ted drove her to the babysitters in her car to pick up Molly. He then scooped Molly and put her in the car. She then drove. Hello. And Ted held Molly on his lap. They had to park 2 blocks away, and Ted carried Molly all the way to her apartment. So at this point, Elizabeth is feeling very sick. So not only does she tell her life story, now he knows where she lives.
Well, and that's your child.
Right.
That you met a few hours ago.
To just be an advocate a little bit, this is the 60s and 70s.
Right.
We're back. You're now entering into the golden age of the serial killer. The 70s and 80s that's what they literally called it in law enforcement. And the reason it was so easy for serial killers back then is hitchhiking. Everybody hitchhiked.
I did.
Yeah.
Unlocked doors.
Everybody knew everybody, trusted everybody. So you didn't really think in the terms of this person could be a killer.
Never did.
Back then. So, and plus she was raised in a very wholesome environment. So I just think that, I personally wouldn't do that, but we were raised in the 80s when serial killers were around, and the 90s, and now where it's like, I wouldn't trust anybody with my son.
Right.
So, just a little bit of an advocate there, I guess. But she was feeling sick from all the drinking. She told Ted that she didn't think she could drive him home. So she invited him to stay the night.
Very nice girl.
Yeah.
Please don't do that.
Yes, please don't. So she fell into the bed, and Ted, still dressed, laid down next to her, and she slept fitfully throughout the night. She remembers that Ted would get up and walk around the apartment part of the night, and then she saw him one time standing next to her dressing table, looking around. So he's definitely figuring out who she is. He's snooping.
That would scare me, just standing there looking around.
Yeah.
You wake up to that.
But she's partly drunk, and she's probably in and out.
Right.
So she woke up at 7 the next morning to the sound of Ted moving around the kitchen. He came out with a cup of coffee, and she felt physically awful, but also ashamed. And she never brought a man home from a bar, and so she was definitely embarrassed probably. And so she showered. She joined him at the table trying to figure out how on earth to explain his presence to her daughter Molly when Molly woke up. So, and then without the alcohol, she's now back into her shy realm.
Right.
Well, and she's probably beating herself up. I think you had mentioned that she would analyze what she said, what she did for months.
Yeah. So number one, is she wondering what she said? And then is she remembering the part she did say?
Yeah.
So the whole thing is just weird. And so her and her daughter had plans that day, and Ted hinted that he wanted to go and hang out, but she ignored him, and then she dropped him off at his apartment.
That's interesting.
Well, she was humiliated. It wasn't that she didn't want him to. She was just humiliated, and she wanted to get him out of there because she was so embarrassed. So they decided, though, to have dinner together that night. And they went shopping at a classy supermarket that she'd never been before. So here she is, a small-town girl, Mormon faith, single mom, limited means, and he takes her to a classy supermarket. Her little store by her house was grimy and definitely not at this level. He chose the wine, the steaks, the loaf of French bread, and the salad greens. And then they picked up Molly, and he cooked the meal, which impressed her. He was also charming with little Molly, who kept wanting his attention. And so he read her one of her favorite books, Teddy Bear of Bumpkin Hollow. He kissed her goodnight after they finished the wine off, and they decided to spend the weekend together in Vancouver. Each episode, we like to give helpful resources for those of you that might be in abusive relationships and you need to find a way out. Even though Ted Bundy was never in the military, I wanted to share a resource for those of you that are. One is called military1source.mil, and this is a great website to help you get help if you are in the military or married to someone in the military. They also have a really quick safety alert where you can click exit site, and it will take you to a weather website. The other one is called womenslaw.org. It's also for those that are suffering domestic violence in the military. So we've got all of these resources on our website. If you are in trouble or you're trying to find a way to get out, please visit outlineofamurder.com and look at some of those resources and get some help. So here's the next phase of the hook, and that is it sunk deeper in that. Okay, number one, she's at a bar, she's got all of her past, and this handsome man asks her to dance. They get to talking. He was polite. He didn't push himself on her. He is now showing attention to her child, which will go straight to the heart of any mother. And then he has class. Mm-hmm. So for her, she probably feels like he's above her. And he makes the decisions on the steak, the wine.
Control again, too.
She probably interpreted it as care.
Right.
A good guy.
Yeah.
Well, and back then, I think that it was probably expected of men to do that as well,
and
right?
to take charge.
Yeah.
To take
That's
charge
true.
and make those decisions. So, yeah. So, and then Vancouver, they're just going to drive over to Vancouver. I mean, I can just imagine what she felt like. This guy is it.
Like a princess.
Yeah. Well, the Phantom Prince. So this began a years-long journey with one of the most notorious serial killers in America. So this right here is one of the pictures of them. They would go like swimming a lot or to the lake and go rafting. You can see his appearance here. And even though he was a small man, his build reminds me of my dad's. My dad is really small, but he was very wiry and strong. And so this is one when they first started dating because Molly's so little there. And then this is another of him with Molly at Christmas time. And we'll get into this picture later more, but you can tell she's laughing and he looks like he's having a good time. This is another picture of him. So now he's got the longer hair. They were on a trip together. And I think even though he's making a silly face, he looks most handsome there, actually. It's funny. And then this is them where things were starting to break down a little bit. But this is the most infamous picture. Him with the suspenders
You see that
in front
on
of the fireplace.
news, magazines, yeah.
He had already started killing in both of these.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll leave one of those up. I don't really want to see his face too much, but
Hold on.
it'll keep us focused.
His arms and his hands are always grasping them.
I noticed that too. Mm-hmm.
Grasping?
Yeah. Like hanging over them, like almost every single picture, his arm was
Like possession?
Like this, though. It was turned towards her. It wasn't just like a draping.
Oh, around her.
Yeah. And the hands were grasping their heads. Yeah.
And again, I mean, we'll never know, but I wonder if she was a victim, if he intended to start killing that night or kill again, because he was sad and he was acting weird, and
When
he
he
would
met
do
her?
that. Yeah, he would do that when he wanted to kill. It was almost like he would fight it off, and then he'd get moody and he'd even cry, and then he would kill and he'd be chipper like nothing had ever happened.
I
So,
agree that he killed before.
I do too. Yeah,
There's
and
probably
we
a lot
can't
more
prove it. Probably ever.
Victims that they don't even know about.
Yeah, but so it does. It makes me wonder if she was going to be a victim, but something changed his mind. I don't know. Okay, so they seemed like a pretty serious couple. They were sexually intimate. She said that he was very satisfying in that respect. She met his parents. He met hers. She really wanted to get married, but he wasn't keen on the idea at first. He finally agreed, and when they announced it to her parents, they were less than enthused, and we'll get into why later. But they liked Ted, but some things had occurred, and they didn't think that was a good idea. But Elizabeth had already begun at this point in their serious relationship suspecting him of being the killer.
Really?
Yeah, and we'll get in depth into all of that, but...
And how much time was that? How much?
Well, they started dating in 69, 70, and it was in 74 that the first killing occurred in her neighborhood.
And she suspected it was him.
Not right off the bat, but then later when a coworker said, "Could that be your Ted?" it triggered it. So, and again, we're going to dig in. I just want to lay the groundwork. So she, in probably 4 or 5 years into the relationship, she's beginning to wonder, and the relationship had started going downhill a little bit at this point too. She'd contacted the police several times, and they said, "We've already checked into him." So, it was crazy. But one night, after, like these ladies are getting killed in her neighborhood, he moves to Utah. It's happening there. She's like, okay, what's going on here? And what fascinates me is even though she loved him and was really addicted to him, it didn't blind her to the fact something's weird. And I admire her that she stepped out and called the police.
Yeah.
He had the VW bug. His name was Ted, and there were some other things that made her suspicious, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we already checked him out." So he was cleared. But then when it starts happening in Utah, so she calls the Utah police, and they weren't nice.
Isn't that unusual for a personality like her?
Yes.
To call?
Yes. And how the police treated her initially is so annoying. Now, on the other side, I can see, like, she's the girlfriend. They probably got in a fight, and she's wanting to,
Revenge.
But she didn't come off that way. And so it was really sad. And
But at the same time, when you make those calls, you're going to hope.
they say no.
Yeah.
And she
Right.
would do that. She'd be like, well, I'm not sure,
Right.
And so she wouldn't give her name. And that was irritating to them. So, but one night in a panic, she just called her dad. And she's like, I think he's the killer.
Wow.
And, she was trying to get some assurance from him. Like, that's ridiculous. We've known Ted for 4 or 5 years. There's no way he's the killer, And, but he didn't have much to say. He just said, you need to be sure before you ruin a man's life. And that's all he would say.
He probably had doubts of something.
Well, and
Just didn't know
then when
what.
they say we're going to get married, that's why they weren't enthused. Is he a killer or a good guy?
Well,
Which
I
is
wouldn't.
it?
If you came to me and said, I think someone's a killer, and then months later, I think I'm going to marry that guy.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be happy.
Would you be quiet? Would
No,
you not?
I wouldn't be quiet.
I mean, that whole time?
I don't know, because
Maybe they weren't quiet.
I would probably be like the dad, like, well, we can't ruin his life. You know, I mean, you can't just say.
I would check more.
Yeah. So I'm sure you can imagine, you know, what was going on there. So they weren't happy with the announcement, and then later they called off the engagement. But at first, things are perfect. So he seemed to be all she was looking for in a husband and stepdad for Molly. They could talk about anything. I mean, topics that she probably never discussed before, you know, art and travel and things like that. And then she felt that she could be herself. Now, this is what's irritating to me about the whole story, and it's this. He was a conservative.
That irritates you?
Yes, because I'm a conservative. You know, I don't want, you know, him to be a Republican. He was a serial killer. So anyway, that was a little bit irritating. But even though he was a conservative, he did sympathize with some of the students that were protesting some stuff at the college and the university back in the day of Vietnam. So he even worked on 2 Republican campaigns, Nelson Rockefeller in 1969, and then the re-election campaign of Washington Governor Dan Evans. Yeah. So Elizabeth viewed him as sophisticated and intelligent, unlike herself. I cannot tell you how many S's feel that way.
Really?
Yeah, they don't feel like they're smart. They feel like everybody else is smarter than them, and they're super smart, but it's just how they see themselves and their perspective.
That's why she probably thought she had won the lottery.
And so this part here, I'm not sure what I would think about this. So he started helping her dress. So it's kind of like Dirty John, where he's like, you know, dress me, show me how to dress. In this case, it's switched. And so he started helping her pick out a wardrobe that was more, you know, to where the circles he hung out in. I mean, he's hanging out with governors and leaders, and even in law enforcement. He would volunteer for different studies, which I think is how he figured out how to do some of the stuff he did. And so she's now, you know, coming to his level, quote unquote, and she's liking it. But to me, I could see that, but I could also see it being a form of control.
Yeah.
Personally. So.
But to her, she was probably thinking.
Well, and I just had this thought, you know, when he started killing, remember his first girlfriend, Susan, I think was her name. And she was what he wanted to be, from a wealthy family, intelligent, running in the same circles. He absolutely fell in love with her, and then she broke up with him because he lacked ambition and he wasn't what she was wanting in life. Mm-hmm. That sparked, I think, his killing. And so...
Did she have long hair?
Yes. And so then what's interesting is that now you've got Elizabeth, where he's the metropolitan, sophisticated person, and now he's going to feel good taking a country bumpkin, right? And making her what he wants. Yeah. So...
she probably felt lucky.
She probably felt lucky.
That is a lot of work.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So he encouraged her to dress better, opened her up to a world of culture that she'd never been a part of. Then at the re-election celebration for Evans, she said that she stuck by Ted's side, feeling stupid, boring, and ugly. Wow. And she finally slipped out to a tavern and got drunk. She and Ted planned on going to the governor's inauguration ball, and she needed a dress. So they went to Northgate Mall, and she and Molly loved a red dress he found, but he felt it was too flashy. So he picked a conservative but pretty black knit dress. Suddenly, Ted shoved the dress box at her, took off running. He was chasing a purse snatcher and got him. And he told her that he cornered the criminal in a dead-end alley before thinking he wasn't armed, and she was awed by his bravery.
Now, was that verified?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he did.
Okay.
And he also saved a little boy from drowning at Green Lake, I think, up in Washington. And he also worked at a suicide hotline with Ann Rule.
With Ann Rule. Strange he did all that, and he's
Well, there's a
killer.
thing called hot and cold empathy, and we'll discuss more of it if we want in the after show combo. But the idea is that as a psychopath, the robbery, the purse snatch, and then saving the little boy, there was no compassion or empathy like we would think of empathy. It wasn't warm empathy. It was a calculated decision because the crime did not serve a purpose and it would make him look good.
Ah, gotcha.
Oh, yeah.
It goes along with the image he was trying to project.
And Ted Bundy.
Yeah.
Aren't not narcissists like that?
Yeah. Yeah. And there's actually a way you can tell for our listeners out there that maybe aren't the sweetheart S's, but they're D's and C's. There's a very easy way to tell if you are a psychopath. You don't even need a quiz. If anybody wants it, though, they can message me. But it was in this book where I learned about hot and cold empathy, and they discussed Ted Bundy. And because the little boy was 2 years old, he had wandered away from his parents. They were getting set up for their picnic and stuff by the lake, and they didn't notice, and he fell into the water. And then Ted Bundy went in there, rescued him. He got like accommodations for that as well as a purse snatch. And what's interesting is that they said that he operated, obviously under the cold empathy, and then they said you might have cold empathy as well. And so I'm like, oh, I wonder, if I'm a psychopath or not. And I'll never forget the road I was driving on, and it said, okay, so here's the scenario, because we're almost done with part one. Here's the scenario. You're driving down, sorry, I was driving down the road, but there's a train coming, and there's where the tracks will V off, okay? On one track is one person that if you flip a switch, the train will divert and only kill one person versus 5 people in a car stuck on the tracks. Would you pull the lever to switch it just to kill the one? And I'm like, oh yeah, of course.
Me too.
Yeah, save,
Would you?
Save 5.
I would try to come up with another option.
That's a C personality. See, C personalities always say that. Me, I'm like, absolutely. But then it gets further. So the further one is, okay, so it's the same scenario, except this time, you've got like 15 people on this train, they're going to die, and you're on a bridge, and you see a man that's a large man, overweight man, and you, to save the 15, you'll throw him off the bridge in front of the train to save them. And so I'm in my car driving. I'm like, absolutely.
Me too.
I mean, you have to throw them off the bridge because you got to save the 15. So right after, I'm like, sure. The author goes, if without hesitation you said you would have no problem throwing a human over the side of the bridge, you probably are a psychopath. And I'm all, what?
Well, me too, I guess.
And so then I took the quiz. I was 3.5 out of 5. And I was like, wow.
So my daughter's a psychopath?
Yes, but
That doesn't mean you're a killer.
it doesn't mean I'm a
You're
killer.
psychopath.
There's functioning psychopaths and non-functioning psychopaths. But that's the idea is that the empathy is cold. And so like I tell people, and we were talking about this yesterday, Elena, where it's like if I have not gone through something that someone else has gone through, it's hard for me to feel that. So I will acknowledge that's terrible, but I feel nothing.
Yeah.
Right.
But if I've gone through it, my heart will feel it. And so, like we were saying, I mean, top psychopaths are CEOs, surgeons, clergy, lawyers, salespeople.
Politician.
Yes, they're the top ones. And quite frankly, it comes in real handy when I'm mentoring people and trying to navigate them through extremely difficult circumstances. Because if my thinking's clouded by emotions, it makes it hard.
It does. Oh.
So, but not everything was perfect. Like I said, she really wanted to get married. He wasn't interested. She played
first.
Yeah. And I think he only said yes to get her off his back because he was doing all kinds of stuff behind her back, which we'll get into in part 2 and 3. She played games like going on dates with men. and he'd cry. And they'd get back together. She'd pick fights with them. So it was like a continuous cycle. It was a very toxic.
She would?
Yeah. It was a very toxic relationship, and it's like they both were feeding on each other's toxicity. And plus her drinking's getting worse. And so then she'd feel ashamed, for causing problems. They'd get back together. But things were starting to cool, and Elizabeth was basically a pit stop for him. So he'd for days, weeks not talk to her, and then all of a sudden he'd be there. So she was tired of all talk and no action. He'd say the right words and she'd get hooked again. So let me finish real quick with this. So she tells him, or he tells her that he's going on a date. And she's like, who? And he said, a woman I work with. Tell me you're kidding. Please don't do this to me. I slammed down the phone and waited for him to call back, but he didn't. I told my boss I had to leave. I rode my bike home, crying all the way and talking out loud to myself, telling myself it wasn't true. I took my bike into my apartment, threw it on the floor. I let out a scream. You asshole. I shouted, you, and I'm sorry, but I don't say the F word.
Yeah.
So, you made me kill my baby for you and your GD career, you miserable son of a bitch, Ted Bundy. I hate you. Yeah.
Wow.
I don't.
So she had an abortion?
I guess. So then I started on myself. God, you're stupid, Liz. You're a GD stupid idiot. A GD ugly pig. So that's sad to me. What did you think he would do? Love you and cherish you? He just used you and now he's through with you. I poured myself a glass of scotch and drank it straight. It burned and tasted awful, but I deserved to be burned. I prayed the phone would ring, or that maybe he'd knock on the door and put his arms around me and take the pain away. I poured another drink. I went into the bathroom and looked in the mirror at my ugly, puffed face. You're going to be held accountable, I told that face. I took the bottle of scotch, sat in the back closet, and drank till I passed out. When I came to is after midnight. My apartment was pitch black, and I didn't want any lights. As long as it was dark, I might be dreaming. There was a little scotch left in the bottle, and I drank it down. Still, with the lights out, I changed into my jeans, put on a black sweater and a black parka, put a small butcher knife in my pocket, and set out for Ted's place. I didn't know what I was going to do when I got there. I kept my hand on the knife in my pocket, very much afraid that I'd be attacked. Because at this point, there's people being murdered. I looked up at Ted's windows, no lights, so I sat down on the porch to wait for him. I got cold fast. Maybe this wasn't such a good idea. Maybe if I went back to my place, Ted would be there. So I crept back home. No one was there, and no one had been there. I drank the beer in the refrigerator and passed out again. First thing the next morning, I threw on clothes, drove over to Ted's. His landlord let me in, and when I knocked on Ted's door, there was no answer. So he must have stayed the night with that lady. I felt around the ledge where Ted always hid his key, let myself in. The bed was made. He hadn't come home at all. I poked around the room looking for evidence. I found it. In his garbage can was a note from a girl named Marcy. Saw you out riding your bicycle in the sun. Came by to visit, but you weren't here. You missed out. So by this time, Ted burst into the rooms. I was lying on his bed, hysterical. What are you doing here? He said, coming towards me. I sat up and started scooting backwards away from him. I didn't want him to touch me. Are you all right? I rolled off the bed and shot past him. He reached out and grabbed me, wrapped his arms around me. I was shaking with rage. I had so much to say, but I was speechless. Stay here until I get back, he told me. I nodded, but as soon as I heard him go out the front door, I ran after him. He was just getting into a sporty red car. So here she's having a mental breakdown. He leaves. That must be her car. Maybe I should follow him. Go back to my room and wait for me, he shouted as he drove off. I sat on his porch steps and put my head on my knees and rocked back and forth and moaned and moaned. So then the landlady comes up and she drives home, and then he, comes up to her place, and they have, the fights, and she wouldn't talk to him, leave me alone, blah, blah. But I wanted to read that just to give you a picture of how emotionally unstable she went with him. She lost it.
Was she an alcoholic? They didn't say, did they?
Yeah, she was definitely an alcoholic, but to allow any man to have that much control over you, I do think part of it was her young age. I've had breakdowns like that before when I was young, but he was her world.
Yeah.
It was really sad. And so just to finish, he graduated from, that was the pattern right there, what I read from the book, The Phantom Prince. So he graduated from the University of Washington in 72 with honors. I didn't know that. Then he enrolled in law school at Puget Sound. In 74, he started law school at the University of Law School in Salt Lake City, putting even more strain on the relationship. But even before he left for Utah, he was already seeing Carol Ann Boone. Remember her?
Yes, I do. Do you?
Yep. So they met in 74 while both of them worked at Washington State Department of Emergency Services, and Elizabeth suspected there was someone else. She said there had to be someone else. I wished I knew what she was like so I could be more like her.
That's sad.
That's very sad.
Self-esteem.
But that wasn't the only thing he's hiding from her.
Right.
He picked a good one.
Yeah.
She was perfect.
So, got 10 minutes. We have to leave for our facial, obviously. So we'll finish part 2 when we get back. But any thoughts?
Her personality jumped, didn't it? From meek. Then she played games.
I
Was
thought
a
that
little
was interesting
manipulative.
too.
And then weak again.
All self-esteem.
Yeah. She would do anything to keep him. That's what was happening.
And they were together for a while.
They were. They were not good for each other. They were not good for each other at all. But she definitely was, in with the wrong person for sure. But I did too. And I admire her vulnerability for sharing this story because there's some embarrassing parts in there. And quite frankly, there were times I didn't like her. I'm like, you put your daughter in danger. You're with this freak. He obviously doesn't like you enough to stay with you. But again, he has all the right words to say. He hooked her in deep.
Yeah.
Deep.
From the beginning.
Yep. Yeah. So, I guess you could say maybe the moral of the lesson is, I think if you come from certain backgrounds or you're a certain personality, I think every personality has to learn this. But truly loving yourself. Truly creating that mindset of acceptance and processing things. Because I think that if you don't like yourself, if you hate yourself, and if you're in blame and regret, I don't know. I think you can literally attract predators.
Which she did.
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
Or at least be blind. And they can make suggestions and say things that you have a gut instinct isn't right, but because you love them, or maybe you're not as smart, or maybe, whatever the...
Good looking.
Yeah, the reason is you'll go along with it and find yourself in a mess.
Oh, sure, yeah. I threw away the briefcase and the crutches and all that stuff. Yeah. And the crowbar, everything. The handcuffs, everything. I'd get mad at myself a few weeks later because I'd have to go out and buy another pair. It's not comical, but that's what would happen.
Outline of a Murder is a Mr. Joseph production. What do you think, Joseph? The primary source for this episode is The Phantom Prince, My Life with Ted Bundy, updated and expanded edition by Elizabeth Kendall, as well as an article at CBS17.com called Triangle Journalist Recalls His Experience Interviewing Serial Killer Ted Bundy.